Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 19th April 2021. In this video, we'll be discussing these couple of issues. Getting farmer numbers right. This article basically deals with the problem of not knowing the exact number of farmers in our country. This is a very crucial number because identifying the exact number of farmers will give us a picture to carry out certain policy initiatives to ensure that these farmers get the benefits of the schemes that we're talking about in day-to-day governance with respect to farmers. So how many farmers do we really have? That is the question that is being asked in this article. Now for this we have to look at the Agricultural Ministry's input survey. So there is a survey called the Input Survey of Agricultural Ministry, and in 2016-2017 they said that the number of operational holdings, that is the land on which agricultural activity is happening, is 146.19 million. So similarly, if you take a look at the NABARD survey that came around the same time in 2016-2017, All India Rural Financial Inclusion Survey said that agricultural households are 100.7 million. So there is a discrepancy in the data. When you're talking about the input scheme, that is PM Kisan, the data from this scheme says that there are around 111.5 million enrolled beneficiaries. Again, agricultural households, how does NABARD define this? It covers any household where the value of produce from farming activities is greater than 5,000 rupees per year. So this is very little. When you are saying that a family can live on 5,000 rupees in modern day India, that is a very unrealistic definition. Since the primary activity of a farmer is farming, it is assumed that he will get his income from agriculture. Now for that to happen, there should be at least 2 crops a year. But if you take a look at the serious farmers in our country and actually calculate how much amount of land are we actually witnessing where average holding size of 1.08 hectares as decided by the survey of Agriculture Ministry says, cultivating a minimum of 2 crops a year would be hardly 47 million. So why am I talking about all these numbers? So you can see that what Agricultural Ministry says, what NABARD says, the schemes, there is no match or uniformity in the data. Who are the farmers? How do you define them? What is the criteria? For different set of schemes, there is different definition. So this brings us to the point that we don't know the exact number of households that depend on agriculture in our country. So who are the beneficiaries? Who are we making these schemes for? That is the central point being raised in this article. Another important metric that you have to consider here is, in a business, obviously the cost of input should be less than the revenue that one is getting. So obviously when the input costs are rising, the cost of the product will also increase. But is the revenue increasing? Not exactly. In the last 2 decades or 3 decades that we're talking about, from 1990, that is the post LPG era reforms, yields have increased 5 times. So similarly, the input costs also increased on a proportionate basis, but revenue is still to be recognized, or it is not yet realized by farmers. The same amount of margins, they are not getting it. In this context, when farmers demand a minimum support price, we cannot say that it is a burden on the state, because creating the right set of market conditions is a job of the government, and it cannot do it without placing the right kind of infrastructure in place. The existing MSP infrastructure is working fine for a lot of farmers, but if you remove that, what is the alternative? What is the guarantee that it will immediately replace the MSP system? This is the question that is being asked. So Considering these points, most of the welfare schemes which address the poverty situation of farmers require a clarity of data. Now, most government welfare schemes are aimed at poverty alleviation, but whom are they targeting? That is the question. There is no policy for the middle class. Even in the farming community, there can be a middle class. That sector is completely ignored. Either we talk about the rich farmers or we talk about the extremely vulnerable farmers, but there is also a small percentage of middle class farmers. What about them? So when a crop fails, there will be escalating costs. There is no revenue. The right hand side is absolutely zero, but input costs keep on raising. This is where the government must step in, identify the right kind of beneficiaries, and there should be a proper policy of price parity. What do you understand by this price parity? Any business is done for profit. Why is agriculture not viewed as a profitable business even in these times? This is something that any agricultural policy should address according to the view of the author. Learning outside ivory tower. This article is with respect to the autonomy of educational institutions. There are a lot of controversies recently with respect to the autonomy of education. On one hand, we have Ashoka University, Professor Mr. Bhanu Pratap Mehta, who has left the university, citing that he did not have the academic freedom. And on other hand, we have IIM Calcutta, which has actually released guidelines saying that the faculty members were debarred from criticizing the government. This is actually against the freedom of speech. So when we are talking about a scenario where a new educational policy talks about academic autonomy or institutional autonomy, does it or does it not include academic freedom is the central question that we are trying to understand. Now, in this context, you have to understand why this autonomy is really important. You have to understand that social institutions are the places where alternative thoughts, discussions, and debates happen. Universities are such social institutions, and professors are the anchors of holding those debates, and they actually influence the thought process and thinking process of the students sometimes. In this condition, the imagination of the university across the world is quite different from the space that we give to universities in our higher educational institutions. We always talk about packages, we always talk about how much earnings these students will make in different multinational companies. But is it the crux of our educational system is the central question that the new education policy or the National Education Policy 2020 did not address comprehensively. When you have as many as 1,000 universities in our country, 128 institutes of national importance, understanding the role of universities as social institutions that can shape up ideas is very important. The other side of the argument is that certain scholars, in the name of freedom of expression, come up with criticisms that are so harsh that don't have any practical solutions to come up with. So, how do we decide that this is the border on which you can stop criticizing the government, or rather, what is the limit for criticism is something that we have to discuss and debate today. Also, one more issue that we have to recognize here is, apart from his role as a professor in Ashoka University, Mr. Bhanu Pratap Mehta is also a consultant editor of Indian Express, and he often comes up with his opinion pieces in the newspaper and criticizes the government. So, do we have to differentiate the person as a intellectual in public life and his role as a teacher in universities? What is the line that we have to draw? So these are the parameters that are up for discussion, and a clarity needs to be achieved on this particular issue. The clarity can start if we discuss and debate about how we are going to implement the autonomy issue that was raised in the new educational policy, the national education policy of 2020, is the central question that we have to address now in the present state of things, because universities after all are the places where social interactions happen and intermingling of cultures happen. That is why these are very important. That is the gist of this article.